So many of us are familiar with the phrase, good intentions. Well, so-and-so had great intentions. They had good intentions. I had good intentions. We know that phrase, right? And often that feels good to some extent for someone to say, I'm sorry I didn't do that, but I really had good intentions. You think, well, at least the thought was there. And that's okay for a while and for some things, right? But then, especially if you start to notice a pattern in somebody, that they always say they had good intentions, but they never actually did it, right? And after a while, you kind of think, well, that maybe it was a very genuine good intention, but it didn't go very far. Or maybe you realize it about yourself. I always have good intentions. I just seem to have trouble actually doing it. That's a very human thing. We all do this. All of us. We all do this to some degree about all kinds of things in our lives. It's just kind of a normal human thing, isn't it? Well, that really is kind of, to put it in a more contemporary, popular way, a lot of what the Scripture is dealing with today. But I want to start recounting a story in the Gospel of Matthew, because last week I mentioned that story where Jesus had been traveling with his disciples, and he said, asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they had their responses, and then Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "Well, flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, Simon, but only God in heaven. So you are no longer simply Simon, Jewish given name. You are now Peter, a Greek name meaning rock. And upon this rock I will build my church." Okay. Immediately after that, right after that, Jesus begins telling the disciples, here's what's going to happen. I think y'all ought to know that. You probably didn't say y'all. I'm trying not to say that so often, so give me grace there. I'm from Texas, and so I'm going to try. I'm trying to work on that. He said, you would need to know this, that we're going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to die, but I will be raised on the third day. And this newly christened Peter immediately jumps in and says, no, that's not going to happen. We are not going to stand for that. We are not going to let that happen, right? Do you remember Jesus' response? Anybody remember Jesus' response to that? "Get behind me, Satan." Well, that's harsh, right? That's kind of harsh. "Get behind me, Satan, for you are thinking of things of the world, not on the things of God." That you're thinking in a way that's going to lead you into actions that are not what God intends. Now, of course, Peter was just in some ways reacting out of what the popular conception was of that day, that the Messiah is going to come in victorious and everything's going to be great. And Jesus is now saying, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. And we may, in fact, go through some really, really hard, difficult times. And so then Jesus follows up that with, "For if you will follow me, you must pick up your cross and follow me daily." So he's saying this is not going to be easy. This is not cheap grace. You have to follow up your good intention with action. Now, we talked about this a little bit last week, the notion of we have our belief, but then there's the behavior that goes with it so that we live a faithful life. So it's kind of the same thing. We're just kind of looking at it at a little bit different angle today. And so last week I mentioned behavior change is difficult. I mean, Peter's acting out of the behavior he typically exhibited. Behavior change is difficult. It always is. Now, to some extent, we have to think of our behaviors in a particular way that helps us to understand what our behavior really is. Behavior is really made up of habits. It's habits. It's just the way we typically do things. And a lot of us have really good and healthy habits. That's fine. That habit by itself is not a bad thing. And so we have these habits that we do. They just are patterns of typically acting in a certain way, right? And so we have to think about that in a way that means that our habits, in a sense, set a trajectory in our life. It's leading us down a path. Now, there's all kinds of habits that we have in our daily lives, but also as people of faith, there are some habits that we have that are about expressions of our faith, that show our values, that reveal our character. And that's important to understand, that the habits that we do lead us down that path. So I read a book several years ago by a guy named Jack Groppel, PhD psychologist who his career took a turn when he began to be kind of a assistant consultant for world-class athletes, particularly tennis players, to help them with their mental game, right? How do you have the right attitude? How do you approach things in terms of your training, your performance, your recovery, all the things? And so he was working with these people, but he just took those principles and applied them to, in the corporate world, the name of the book is The Corporate Athlete. What does it look like to be able to work at your peak efficiency at the times you need to be able to do that? And it's all about habits. It's all about habits. And one of the things he said that our habits are helping us to basically train ourselves to do a thing that we do most often. So I'll just give you some kind of simplistic, silly examples. If you spend 4 hours a day sitting on the couch watching TV, you train yourself to be able to spend 4 hours sitting on the couch watching TV. You're training yourself to do that, and you're probably growing your capacity to do that. So that before long, you're spending 5 hours a day on the TV, on the couch watching TV. You see what I mean? Or you think, a cookie after lunch is not a bad thing. And so you eat a cookie after lunch. And before long, you expect that. Your body expects that. After you have lunch, you're like, where's the cookie? I need a cookie. And before long, you're eating 2 cookies, right? I know none of y'all have this issue. Just an example. That's all it is. And before long, I need some ice cream with my cookie. I mean, right? You are training yourself. This is what I do. This is what I can do. And I'm training myself to do this over and over and over and maybe increase my capacity to do more. So when you think about your habits that way, that kind of changes how you think about the things that you do and the ways that you react. My habit is to do this. So I'm training myself to do that. Is that the right thing to be training myself to do? Is that what I should be doing? What's happening there? And so it's important to understand that we're, in a sense, training ourselves. Now, it's in a sense, it's easier to deal with some of those things in life that we all have, whether you want to lose weight, gain weight, read more, your sleep pattern, you want to change your sleep patterns, because those are more tangible, you can measure those, right? You decide, my goal is to read a book a month. That's my new habit. I'm going to read a book a month. And that's measurable. You can measure that. The harder things and the things that are really more of our concern today have to do with the intangible things, like kindness, patience, compassion, love. I mean, how do you measure those things? I one time joked that we were going to, at a church I was serving at the time, we're going to install, they've just invented this, and we're going to install this thing that goes over the door of the church that when you walk in, it's going to print out a report of how you stack up on things like faith and hope and love, and, had the same reaction when I told that at the time. Yeah, I'm not going to be that. But it's not just that, but all these things, these characteristics, are not just boxes to check, but it's about kindness. That in that situation, I know how to be kind in that situation. What we're talking about is these habits that make you a kind person all the time. In that situation, and in that, and with that person, and that person, that you are a kind person. That it has to do with, in a sense, character. It's about who we are, about our identity. I'm this person all the time. And to have habits that help me to be that and to live that way. So we began this journey in Romans chapter 12 last week. Paul says, do not be conformed to the patterns, habits, of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern and prove what is God's good and perfect will. And he encourages to live your life as a living sacrifice. Live your life as a living sacrifice. I'm here for God to make of me what God wants to make of me. I'm to be the person God intends me to be. And Paul talked about some proactive ways that we take our giftedness and use those in the life of the church for the good of the body. In this passage, in verses 9 through 21, it's kind of long, but interesting. I mean, there are over 30 exhortations or encouragements or teachings, so to speak, where he's saying this is what it looks like. And it starts with let love be genuine, authentic, real, all the time. And the way you live that love out is by not returning evil for evil, but return good for evil. It's about encouraging one another, not being arrogant. It's about all those things. That's how you live that love out. And he interestingly, he directs that at the way we interact in our Christian community, but also, it's not just that, it's about those extended acquaintances, right? Those people outside that you kind of know. And then he says it applies to your enemies. Like Jesus said, this is not going to be easy. It applies to your enemies, how you are toward them and to the whole world. Remember when Jesus said, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth? Same pattern. Because that's the people we are, not just this is the thing we have to do. So important to note that. So I encourage you to read Romans 12 when you have a chance. So one of the things he talks about is this requires, of course, to be renewed by the transformation of your mind, of your thinking, the ways that your perspective, a paradigm, the way that you view the world. Many of you are familiar with, this was from a few years ago, a little bit dated, but the work by Stephen Covey. One of his books, of course, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Oh, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he tells a story in there about the need for a paradigm change. In other words, to see the world differently. And he tells a story, many of you know the story, but he was on a subway in some city going from one place to the other, and there were not that many people on the car, but there was what appeared to be a man who was a father of these 2 children, and the 2 children were running up and down the car, and they were yelling and laughing and screaming and bouncing around on the empty seats and just wreaking havoc. Now put yourself in that situation for a moment. Anybody ever been in a situation like that? Yeah. And you know, and so especially if you don't have your own kids, you're thinking, well, this is annoying, this is terrible. They should control their kids, right? I mean, you're just. And so eventually, Stephen Covey, it just gets so bad. He goes over to the guy and says, excuse me, sir, I think it looks like these 2 kids are your children. And he said the guy kind of was like just staring out the window, and he kind of looked at him like as if out of, like he woke up, and he went, oh, yeah. And he said, well, they're really being loud, and they're kind of getting in people's way, and I'm just wondering if you could get them to come sit with you or something. And the guy said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We just came from the hospital where their mother died, and I guess none of us know what to do. Well, Stephen Covey had an immediate paradigm shift, right? Because all of a sudden it goes from, this is really annoying, and you ought to be doing something, and man, everybody's mad at you, to, oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I didn't know. So part of what Paul is trying to get at is that we be a people that maybe give others the benefit of the doubt, maybe assume positive intent, maybe entertain the idea that they're acting in that way because maybe they've had a really bad day. Maybe they've been through a tragedy. I don't know. But to be a person that approaches it in that way. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't go to somebody and say, I don't know if you're aware that your kids are doing this, but you do so with compassion. You approach it very differently, right? You approach it very differently. I talked a little bit about behavior change last week, and I think I said last week, I meant to, that I was going to be a little more practical today on this. So as I've talked through these things, you may be thinking, yeah, there's some ways that I probably should be better about that. I probably should be more patient. I probably should be more kind, compassionate, more loving, generous, all the things, right? So how do you do it? Since those things are kind of hard to measure, how do you do it? Well, so there's going to be some questions that I think you have to entertain, and so this is kind of the really practical portion. They'll be on the screens. You can see these questions, but things for you to think about. And one of the things before you even ask the questions is identify a way you want to be better. And I know all of us can make a long list. I should be better about this. I should be better about I should do that. Pick one thing. Pick one. Because my sense is often when we make those long lists, part of it is a way to deflect any attention on any one thing so we don't have to do it. So pick one thing. And my guess is that if you really pick one thing and you really pay attention to that and you really work at that, my guess is that other things kind of flow from it. So pick something, whatever it is. Maybe it's a presenting issue, but just pick what it is. And that may be clear to you. In this moment, it may not be yet, but think about that. So here's some key questions to ask yourself. Why is this change important? Why is this important? You need to know the why. I said that last week. You need to know why. And it shouldn't be just outside pressure. It should be, I know I need to. Or as I pray, I feel led to. Or as I read the scripture, I feel prompted to. This is the thing. Now, and so why is it important? Maybe, and I'll just use an example. Maybe patience is a thing, and you think, well, this is really important because I know that other people that live under my same roof would really appreciate me being more patient. And they've told me so. So maybe that's where I start. Maybe that's why it's important. Maybe you're in a workplace where you interface with a lot of different people all the time, and you know it's important for them to see someone who portrays Christian love and grace in the workplace. And you know it's important. I know I need to be more this way in that space. Why is the change important? Secondly, what does the desired outcome look like? So imagine yourself, okay, now I'm in this, whatever it is, and I see myself living at home, and I'm much more patient. What does that look like? What does that look like for how I'm going to live it out? What does that look like for the impact it has on people around me? What does it look like? And that helps to create the vision, right? I move toward that. What does it look like? Third, what's going to get in the way of me accomplishing this? It's not going to be easy. I guarantee it. What's going to get in the way? Maybe it's long repeated patterns. Maybe you realize I'm simply living out the kind of patterns that I saw my family of origin living out. I know I'm impatient with people in my life because nobody was patient with me earlier in life. So maybe the identification, that's going to get in the way. You have to be aware of that. And what does that mean to change that? So what's going to get in the way? That can be a number of things. And then last, what support do I need? Paul emphasizes time and time and time and time again throughout all of his letters. You know, Paul's writings constitute about 25% of the New Testament. I mean, this is a significant amount of input Paul has into who we are as Christians and how we are to live as church. And he emphasizes over and over, it's about doing it together. We need each other. We're in this boat together. So we need each other. We need support. We need to be able to count on one another. And so it could be just talking to a friend and saying, you know, I realize I have been this kind of person and I really want to address that. So feel free to point it out to me nicely. Nicely. If you're going to point it out to me, be nice. But point it out to me so I can go, you're right. In a moment, you're exactly right. Or or ask me a question, once a week. Just ask me, how are you doing with that? What kind of support do you need? There's all kinds of books about everything anymore. There's all kinds of YouTube channels about all kinds of things anymore. There are professionals who can help with this, whether it be a life coach, whether it be a therapist. There's all kinds of help you can get and have resources and support for these things. And so I encourage you to think of what that support would look like. So I'll tell you about somebody I knew personally that he took this very, very seriously. His name was Ed. This was years ago. Ed was a World War II veteran, and he had been a POW in Japan. He was there was not only, sometimes you hear the Lost Battalion mentioned. Well, there was not only one. There were more, and he was in one of those Lost Battalions. Their ship, they had left, and they were off the coast, I believe, of the Philippines, and the ship was torpedoed and was going down, and miraculously, virtually all the soldiers made it to shore, but they were captured by the Japanese, and no one knew where they were. The United States knew the ship went down. That's all they knew. And so for 3.5 years, he was a POW in Japan. Some of you might have read the book or seen the movie Unbroken. Yes. The stories Ed told, yes. Very difficult time. And when Ed died, the doctors, he had health issues late in life, and the doctors said, he has lung disease from working in the coal mines all those years ago. But Ed, in the years that I knew him, he was kind of a curmudgeon kind of a guy. So it's okay to be a curmudgeon, right? If you're, that's okay to be it's okay. As long as you take seriously what it means to really live out your faith. And so somewhere in his early adult life, after he was back, he'd gone to work, had a family, and he became familiar with a missionary, a United Methodist missionary to Japan named Harry Burton Lewis. And he heard Harry Burton Lewis speak. He got to know Harry and learned of the work that Harry was doing. And Ed developed a love for Japan and the Japanese people. So his entire adult life after that, he told me he prayed daily for any mission, any good in Japan. He prayed for that. And he gave generously his entire adult life to help the mission effort in Japan for the people who had treated him so cruelly. But he didn't see it that way. He said there were people acting in ways they didn't know what they were doing, and they were under orders, and they were the whole thing. I know that doesn't mean all of them are that way. And it changed his life. Such is the power of a paradigm change and a change of behavior, to be able to actually exhibit in the ways that we live that we are a person who exhibits these things in our life, so that our good intentions become regular behavior. One of the ways that we see Jesus do this, of course, is in the ways that Jesus would portray what it looks like to be that person. Jesus often gathered at a table with people. Sometimes people of ill repute, sometimes people who had a bad reputation, sometimes people who had done bad things. And Jesus was criticized for it. But he did it because he knew that's why he was there. That's why he was there, was to extend, the love of God. For God so loved the world that he would give his son. Because he did not send the son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. And so Jesus exhibited that, what that looks like to live this way. So we take seriously the teaching and example of Jesus and what that would mean for us. And so as we approach the table today, we do so as people knowing that we're here by invitation. Jesus invites all of us to be here. And that's, I mentioned earlier, if you're not a member here, if you're a guest, you are welcome to come for communion. Because we believe this is the Lord's table, not our table, not my table, certainly. It's the Lord's table, and all are invited, and we simply here to serve the people who come to the table. So at the appropriate time here in a little bit, you would be invited to come forward and know that you're welcome to do so, but you do not have to. So so when we gather around this table, part of what we do is we remember. We remember the things that God did. God created the world, called it good. God has an intention for the world, that the world be in right relationship with God and with one another. And everything that we read in the Bible, everything we see in Jesus' life is in that effort. And so we can come to the table and be part of this one bread, one body. Because God has made us one together. Regardless of who you are, where you're from, what you look like, what language you speak, but anything. We're one. God has made us one. And we drink from the cup, reminding us that this is about the forgiveness of sins, because none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. And so with that humility, we accept the forgiveness that God offers us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So that we can be those people God intends, and we can exhibit those signs of faith in our lives, so that we're not just acting something out, we're actually that person. Authentic. Let love be genuine, authentic, real, and we'll live that out. I invite you to pray with me. Oh God, we thank you for these gifts. We thank you for this bread of heaven and the cup of salvation, the gift of the earth and the fruit of the vine. We thank you for these gifts to us as we enjoy them in a daily life, but we especially today as we remember that this is the real presence of Christ. That with all that you did with the creation and the many, many ways that you offered salvation to your people, ultimately you came in the person of your Son Jesus to be with us, to be one of us, to be among us, so that we might know new life, abundant life, and that we can make that life to be a testimony and a witness to your goodness and glory. So we thank you for these gifts, and we thank you for the gifts that are in this room, the other people in this room, who are also a gift to us and a gift to our life, so that we can work together and we can learn and we can grow together, so we can more and more not only be the person but the church you want us to be. And so God, we pray as you would bless these gifts that are made with human hands, and yet with the gift of your Spirit, they truly become the real presence of Christ. Bless these gifts and on us who receive them, so that we might be those transformative people in the world. And as we do so, we'll remember the words that Jesus taught his disciples to pray when he said, you ought to pray like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I'd invite those who are assisting to serve the congregation, if you would come forward to prepare at this time.